So here's what I want to do here today. I want to talk about motivation, innovation, and education. Some of you probably picked up on that a little earlier, but I want to talk about motivation, innovation, and education. And I think I want to try to connect it. I'm going to try to connect it to the arts, and I'm going to try to connect it to some of the innovative things that are going on here. So let's get started. So how many of you want our next generation of thinkers to be innovative? All right, pretty interesting question. So I don't think there's any disagreement about that. I can't imagine anyone saying, no, I don't want people to be innovative. I want them to be boring. I want them to be compliant. I want them to be conventional and conformist. You don't hear that, all right? So we have some consensus. There's a lot of dissension in education, but there's some consensus here. We want people to be innovative. So that leads to the next question, which is how do you motivate people to be innovative? And I want to tell you a little bit about what the research on motivation says. It'll be, a few minutes of it will be a bit of a refresher course for some of you. But I want to talk about what some of the research on motivation says, because I think that even though there's consensus on the fact that we want people to be innovative, there's some disagreement on how to motivate people to do that. And I think as we think about how to motivate people, we should base our decisions not on political ideology or on philosophy or on folklore, but on the facts. So let's talk about the facts of motivation and what it means for innovation. So we tend to think that, here's the thing that's so interesting about motivation. Everybody in this room is an expert on motivation. Not because many of you are teachers, but because all of you, at least so far as I can see, all of you are human beings. All right? But most of you don't realize how much you know about motivation because your knowledge is implicit. We have all kinds of knowledge out there that is implicit. And I want to give you a weird analogy on that. How many of you here in this room, give you a weird analogy here to demonstrate what implicit knowledge is versus explicit knowledge and why implicit knowledge matters a lot. How many of you in this room majored in physics in college? How many physics majors do we have here? Okay, looks like, I'm going to estimate, looks like less than half of you majored in physics. But every single person in this room has a deep and sophisticated knowledge of physics. Not just the gentleman there, the one gentleman who's a physics major, but all of you actually know an enormous amount about physics. But it's implicit knowledge. You're barely aware that you know it. I can test this proposition very easily here. So let's say that, so this stage is about half a meter off the ground. I'm going to give you some facts. This stage is about half a meter off the ground. I weigh 82 kilos. I'm proud to be the only American who uses the metric system because when I was in third grade in Columbus, Ohio, they promised me that the metric, would be adopted. This is like, I was in third grade in 1973. All right? They said, well, within 2 years, the United States will fully adopt the metric system. So I'm like dutifully like learning all this stuff. And it's like, wait, what? So I refuse to give that up. It drives my kids crazy. They say, Dad, is it hot outside? And I say, yeah, it's actually pretty hot. It's about 31. They're like, oh, come on. In any event, this stage is about half a meter off the ground. I weigh 82 kilos. Make a prediction based on your understanding of physics. What will happen if I take one step this direction and another step this direction? I'll fall. Very good. Now, many of you, how many arts educators we have here? All right, so, oh, awesome. All right, so thank you, first of all. Thank you for what you're doing. Second of all, think about how quickly arts educators of all people figured that out, right? You didn't reason your way through. You didn't say, oh, wow, let's see. He said it was a half a meter off the ground. He said he weighed 82 kilos. Under Dr. Lasky's leadership, the law of gravity is vigorously enforced here on campus. We don't think about it that way. You just know it. It's implicit knowledge. And our knowledge of motivation is also implicit. We know it, but we don't know that we know it. And our knowledge of motivation goes like this. When you reward behavior, you typically get more of it. And when you punish behavior, you typically get less of it. And that's what we base a lot of our decisions on. Rewarding behavior gets you more, punishing it gets you less. Well, here's the thing. For the last 50 years, a group of social scientists all over the world have studied that proposition. The great thing about scientists, so we're talking a lot about the arts, but let's give a few shout-outs to science, because science is enormously important as well. And the great thing about scientists, is that they take claims like that and say, wait a second, let's not declare it settled fact just yet. Let's call it a hypothesis. And let's test the hypothesis. And that's what they've done for 50 years. They've tested the hypothesis. And here, I'm going to tell you what they found out. I'm going to drill down very, very quickly to education and innovation and arts. But at a broad level, here's what they found out. here's what, we can distill 50 years of social science into this crisp statement here. Here's what they found out. When you reward behavior, you do get more of it. Sometimes. When you punish behavior, you do get less of it. Sometimes. But not all the time, and here's the kicker, not nearly as much as we think. And so if you go in, I don't mean you, if people go into their encounters with the wrong understanding and motivation, they're going to make some mistakes. And when those people are legislators, they make really bad mistakes. So, so let's talk about this. I'm going to give you four, I'm going to go very quickly here. I'm going to give you four tidbits of science to help you. I think that many of you already understand this. Some of you have an intuitive sense of it. I want to put some analytic rigor onto, analytic meat onto the bones of your intuition there. And you can carry this forward. But I'm going to also end in some really, I think, one in particular, really important, very tangible, very doable thing that teachers especially can do to take a new approach. So let's talk. I'm going to give you four quick studies, all right? Here we go. Study number one, the big idea. Here's a study, then I'll give you the takeaway. This is now a reasonably well-known study. Here's what happened. It's a group of economists, okay? Economists don't mess around. Economists are tough people. Tough, you could beat them up, but you don't, tough in the sense that, they only care about the data, all right? And so, I don't know if you could beat them. Maybe you couldn't beat them up. I don't know. Don't beat up an economist. Don't beat up anybody. Try to work it out. Economists are tough. They're rigorous. They look at the data. So 4 economists from prestigious North American institutions, University of Toronto, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, did a series of experiments in 2 different places. And here's what they did. They had their participants do a series of challenges. Physical challenges, throw a ball through a hoop, and then cognitive challenges. And the cognitive challenges sort of rode the cognitive escalator upward. So there were some things, memorize stuff, alphabetize stuff, pretty simple cognitive tasks. Then more complicated cognitive tasks, solve this math problem. And then still even more complicated cognitive tasks. Here's an item, come up with as many non-obvious uses for that item as you possibly could. So things that require innovation, creativity, divergent thinking, that sort of stuff. So rode the cognitive escalator upward. And they treated everybody the same except for the amount of reward that was promised to people. So the first group, they said, so it's 3 groups of participants. Group 1, they say if you're one of the top performers, you get a little bit of money. Group 2, if you're one of the top performers, you get more money. You get 10 times what that group is getting. Group 3, if you're one of the top performers, you get a whole lot of money. You get 10 times what the second group is getting. Okay, so we've got, I don't want to scare anybody with algebra here, but you have x, 10x, and 100x, small, medium, large. So we expect that the group with the greatest reward will do the best, and that's what happened. As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they'd be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay, so this group did better than the second group, and the second group did better than the first group. Okay, this is pretty much what most of us expect. But here's what most people don't expect. Some of you might expect this, but here's what most people don't expect, which is what they also found out. Once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, okay, that's their phrase, not mine, rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Whoa, this is sort of freaky. What? This is upside down. A larger reward leads to poorer performance? This is very, very strange. How could this possibly be? This seems un-American, doesn't it? I mean, I know there's some people in this country concerned about the specter of socialism, and this is just another example of it, right? This is socialism. What? A larger reward leads to poorer performance? How could that possibly be? Well, this conclusion that they reached actually isn't that surprising. This conclusion is what social scientists have been finding for 50 years, over and over and over again. Now, this is the big idea, and there's some nuance, so I'm going to make it as explicit and clear as I possibly can. There's a certain kind of reward that we use in organizations, in schools, and in our households. Psychologists call it a controlling contingent reward. I call it an if-then reward. If you do this, then you get that. If you do this, then you get that. Here's what 50 years of research tells us very, very clearly. If-then rewards are great for simple and short-term tasks. They work like a dream. They're really effective. We might not like that. We might not like what that says about human character. But you know what? For simple short-term tasks, if-then rewards are really effective. Let's talk about why that is. Do we like rewards? Of course we love rewards. We love them. They get our attention. They get our attention in a very focused way. You offer somebody a big reward, you got their attention. How do you have their attention? You have their attention like this. They're locked in. I want that reward. What do I have to do? I'm going to do exactly what I need to get that reward. I can see the finish line. I'm locked in. That's a very good frame of mind for certain kinds of things. For tasks that are what psychologists call algorithmic tasks, where you're following an algorithm, following a recipe, following a set of steps. And you don't have to sustain your energy for that long. So for simple, short-term, mechanical, algorithmic tasks, if-then rewards are very effective. I mean, at some level, I think some of us wish they weren't effective, but they are, because we really like rewards. But the same body of research tells us that if-then rewards are not so great for complex and long-term tasks. Why? Do we like rewards? We love rewards, right? They get our attention. How do they get our attention? They get our attention like this. That's a very good frame of mind if you know precisely what you need to do. But if you have a longer time horizon, if you're trying to imagine something that no one else has imagined before, if you're trying to innovate, if you're trying to do something unique, focusing like this, you're not going to come up with anything awesome that way. You got to look over here, you got to look over there, you got to take something from this pile, combine it with this pile, turn it upside down, play with it a little bit, requires longer time horizons and an expansive vision. And so if-then rewards, not all rewards, but this mainstay category, again, are ineffective for complex creative tasks for the exact same reason they are effective for less creative, more algorithmic tasks. Here's the thing. This is not a close call. This is not if we were to take any social scientist from here at Towson, pick a name out of the directory, bring her over here and say, guess what? Guess what? You're not going to believe what Dr. Pink, she doesn't know that I don't have a PhD, Dr. Pink just told us. He said that if-then rewards are great for simple and short-term tasks, but not so great for complex and long-term tasks. You know what she would say? Yeah. We've kind of known this for a while. Nobody's working on this anymore. Why are you telling me this? Well, the reason I'm telling you this is that what is very clear in the science is not clear in our organizations, is not clear in the minds of our legislators, and is not clear in some of the policies that are being forced on schools. So let's look at that again. This is the big idea, okay? And as some of you know, I've worked with a couple of you before, you know that I am a firm believer in the rhetorical power of repetition. No, I'm not kidding. I'm a firm believer in the rhetorical power of repetition. So if-then rewards are great for simple and short-term tasks, but they're just not so great for complex and long-term tasks. Now, let's ask some questions about this. Is innovation simple and short-term or complex and long-term? I wonder. Let's ask another question. Let's ask a question. I don't mean to put the. I'm going to put. I'm going to put President Lusky on the spot here. All right. So I'm going to ask you a question here. Are you preparing students here at Towson? Are you preparing students to master rudimentary cognitive skill and above, or rudimentary cognitive skill and below? Exactly. I mean, that's the whole point of what the president was saying before is that we got to go beyond rudimentary skills. We got to have people who can think. We got to have people who can create, people who can innovate. So what we have here is a set of motivators, these if-then motivators, which are great for 19th century work, pretty good for 20th century work, but increasingly are falling behind for 21st century work and 21st century learning. We're using the wrong mechanism. We're using the wrong mechanism. They're right for certain things, but for the broad category of things, the things that you guys are trying to do, the kind of thinking skills that this university is trying to instill in people, those kinds of motivators have outlived their usefulness. That's the big idea. Now let's take this down, or take it up to education. Okay, so let's talk about what does the research say about kids. Okay, what about kids? I'll give you one very famous study here. Those of you with backgrounds in education psychology probably know this study, but it's worth expanding to everyone else too. Here's the study. It was done several years ago on the mean streets of Palo Alto, California. And it involved a group of preschoolers. And these preschoolers had a curriculum of sorts that involved a lot of free play, some free play and some formal curriculum. And what these researchers did is they watched these preschool classes, they watched what kids did during the free play time. How did they spend their free play time? And not surprisingly, if you're talking about 3- and 4-year-olds, a decent number of those kids spent their free play time drawing. Okay, we see that a lot. One of our kids would have spent her free play time drawing. A lot of kids draw. So then they took these kids and they did the following kind of study. They took all the kids who were spending their free play time drawing, and they tried this. They did this study. They divided the kids into 3 groups, and here's how they treated the kids. Let's go one by one through here. So we go here. Tell me your first name.
Tim.
Tim. Let's say that Tim is 4 years old, and we say, Tim, here are some crayons and paper. If you draw, we're going to give you a shiny certificate with your name on it. Okay, that's the expected award group. Go to the middle group. Tell me your first name. Shelly. We go to Shelly. Shelly. Here's some paper and crayons. Draw if you want to. Now, if Shelly turned out to draw something, we gave her a shiny certificate with her name on it. Okay, a little bit different from Tim, right? That's the unexpected award group. Now, let's go over here. Tell me your first name, the man in the front row with the groovy socks.
Jason.
Jason. They are groovy socks, look. Not all of you. You can look at Jason afterwards, all right? So we say to Jason, Jason, here's some crayons and paper. Draw if you want to. Now, whether Jason drew or not, we don't give him any kind of certificate with his name on it, okay? So that is called the no award group. Very simple and straightforward here. Now, not surprisingly, in response to these prompts, most of these kids drew. They're sitting around, they got crayons and paper. These are kids who already like to draw. Most of the kids drew. Big surprise. Here's where it gets more interesting. They follow up a few weeks later, watching the classroom. What are these kids doing during free play time? Go to the Jason group. Weren't given a reward, promised a reward ahead of time or given one after. They're still drawing during free play time. Go to the Shelley group. Shelley, right? Go to the Shelley group. This is important. These are kids who were not promised a reward beforehand, but were given one afterwards. These kids in their free play time, they're still drawing. Go to the Tim group. These are kids who were promised one and then given one. These kids are no longer drawing during their free play time. All right? So this is really important. And again, what makes this interesting is there's some subtlety and some nuance here. It isn't fully black and white. And we tend to think that, oh, it's the reward, it's the award that's the bad thing. And that's not what it was, because remember, Shelley got an award for drawing. But what was different is that it was non-contingent. It wasn't contingent. And remember, the problem with this is the key takeaway, the problem with if-then rewards isn't so much the award or the reward, but the if-thenness. Because if-then is a form of control. And people have only human beings have 2 responses to control. They comply or they defy. But we don't want defiant kids, but we also don't want compliant kids. We want kids who are engaged. And if you try to control people, you're only going to get compliance or defiance. You're never going to get engagement. And so one of the things that this illustrates is that this idea of things that we love to do, things that we feel deeply about, there's a misguided view that if we take something people are deeply interested in and layer on if-then rewards, okay, just these if-then rewards, not all rewards. If we layer if-then rewards on top of something people already love to do, they'll do it more vigorously, they'll do it more. It's just not true. What it often does is it displaces that interest. And it says, well, the reason I draw is to get a certificate. And so this idea of when kids especially love something, that love is actually more fragile than we think. And we can disrupt it, we can taint it, we can pollute it, we can crumble it with control. Now, let's talk about my favorite category of human beings on the planet, teachers. So obviously, Towson is a great place to talk about teachers, the largest producer of teachers in the state of Maryland, all right? So this is the, This institution is actually educating the state right here. This is the place that is educating the state. And so so here's what we know. If-then rewards don't work for complex and creative work. They work for algorithmic work. They're not particularly good for creative work. And that if you layer on if-then rewards on something people feel passionate about, you sometimes can actually diminish the passion rather than enhance it. So we know those things, pretty clear in the research. So what's our legislative, I shouldn't say legislative again, what's our policy remedy? What's our policy plan for teachers? Let's give teachers if-then rewards. What a great idea. What a great idea if you haven't been paying attention for 50 years. What an amazing idea. And what a great analysis of the problem in education, because I think that those of us who know teachers, those of us who've seen our kids' teachers, obviously the problem with teachers is that they're not sufficiently motivated. You know, they're not spending their own money on supplies, they're not doing lesson plans till late in the night or grading papers on weekends, they're just not motivated. So let's motivate them. And also, here's another way to do this. Let's take these people who, by the very choice of profession, have announced to the world, money is not the most important thing in my life. And let's motivate them with money. How about that? Let's offer them bonuses for performance on standardized tests. What a great idea. Just so analytically sound if you stop and think about it, right? But you know, again, that'd be my hunch, my analytic hunch, but I'm an empirical guy, so let's look at the research. There's a lot of it, and it all says the same thing. Let's go to what is increasingly, I think, the sort of you know, one of the gold standard pieces of research, but they all say the same thing. There's a study in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee had enough money to do teacher bonuses for half the middle school math teachers. So they randomly sort the math teachers. Half of them can make a $15,000 bonus. Good money, right? $15,000 bonus for students scoring above a certain level on test scores. The other ones got paid their regular salary, as always. Okay, so it's a kind of a natural experiment. Half of them promised a $15,000 bonus for raising students' standardized test scores. Half of them got paid as usual. What happened? Let's go to there's a lot of politics here, there's a lot of ideology here. Let's go to a neutral arbiter, a guy at Vanderbilt University who studies this thing. He doesn't have a dog in the fight. Here's his conclusion. We sought a clean test of the basic proposition. If teachers know they will be rewarded for an increase in test scores, will test scores go up? We found that the answer is no. There was no difference between the two groups. Big frickin' surprise, right? I mean, but we're going to test it, all right? And so over and over again, here's what you see. These enormously expensive, they're expensive to administer. That's the thing that people don't realize. That if you're going to set up this elaborate kind of incentive system, there's a whole apparatus and administrative structure that you need to orchestrate it, to administer it, to monitor it, to evaluate it, to hear grievances within it, that itself has a cost and has no benefit. Over and over and over again, most of the research doesn't show, a few studies show that it actually diminishes performance, but I think those are outliers. Most of them shows it has no effect. Why? I think teachers are pretty damn motivated. What else? I think that the factors that go into how a middle school student, someone who is 12 or 13 years old, does on a standardized test has something to do other than who his or her math teacher was for the previous 9 months. There is, but I want to be fair to the facts. There is one study in Chicago, there's one example in Chicago that showed that actually these kinds of if-then motivators had an upward effect on student performance. And I just want to be clear on the facts. And they structured it in a different way. Here's what they structured. It's a very different kind of if-then reward. What they did is they gave teachers bonuses at the beginning of the year. Every teacher got, I think it was maybe $4,000 bonus, some kind of bonus at the beginning of the year. And they said their if-then reward was, it's really an if-then punishment. It was here's a $4,000 bonus on top of your regular salary. If your students don't hit a certain score, you have to give the money back. Okay? And that actually, here's what it says. Framing a teacher incentive program in terms of losses rather than gains leads to improved student outcomes. Actually, student test scores did go up in that year when teachers were threatened with having to give that $4,000 bonus back. So there is evidence that some of these if-then mechanisms do work. They did not examine the collateral damage to morale for doing something like that, but that's the only instance where these things were quote unquote effective. A thing that I think would drive a lot of teachers to leave. Now let's talk about my second favorite category of people, artists, all right? And let's try to bring this back to innovation here for a second. So, like that employer who we heard about, I think that the most important cognitive skills today are the cognitive skills of artists. The cognitive skills of artists are the most important cognitive skills today. We obviously need people who are good at math and science. There's no question about that. I think that math and science have a lot more connection to the arts in reality than they do in our curriculum. But that's another story. But we want kids thinking like artists. Why? Let me give you an example. For very hard-headed economic reasons. Let me give you an example of this. How many of you have an iPad? How many of you knew 5 years ago, 4 years ago, that you were missing an iPad? Very serious question. The most important kind of cognitive skill today is the ability to give people something they didn't know that they were missing, to iterate something entirely new, right? Not to make necessarily incremental improvements in existing things, but to create entirely new categories, to give people something bold that they didn't realize that they were missing, giving people something they didn't know that they were missing. Hello, that's what artists do. That's what poets do. That's what painters do. That's what dancers do. That's what theatrical artists do. They give the world something it didn't know it was missing. So we have a tendency, let me just stay here for a moment. I think that our view of art, of the arts, I think that we can make a much more muscular, much more hard-headed case in favor of the arts. When I was growing up in Columbus, Ohio, the way I was taught about the arts as someone who went to a pretty decent public high school, who was pretty good in school, was this, when it came to the arts. All right, if you really want to, you could take an arts class of some kind. Probably is not going to hurt you too much. Don't spend too much time down that hallway. As long as you do your serious stuff, having that as a side dish is probably not going to hurt you, okay? The arts were ornamental, all right? A nice little ornament, a nice little side dish. But I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think Towson is actually leading the way in that with its move toward arts integration. I think that the arts have moved from ornamental to fundamental. I think we need a generation of kids who think like artists. I think we need a generation of kids who think like scientists too. We want scientists who think like artists and artists who think like scientists. That's what we really need. And so the arts are not ornamental, they're fundamental today. They're fundamental to helping people innovate. They're fundamental to the sorts of skills that our kids are going to need on the job. So, if they're fundamental rather than ornamental, how do you motivate artists? All right, this is something that theatrical directors have always wrestled with. But let's put on our left brains and talk about what the science says. There's some great research, some really, really interesting research on this. I wish I could tell you about even more of it. There's some amazingly cool stuff on this. But let me just give you this one. It's a great study of artists done by a great researcher named Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School. And here's what she did. She and her colleagues got 23 artists, painters and sculptors. 23 artists, painters and sculptors. She had these painters and sculptors randomly select 10 of their commissioned works and 10 of their non-commissioned works. 10 of their commissioned works, 10 of their non-commissioned works. So we've got 20 works of art, 23 artists. That's 460 works of art. They were paintings, small sculptures, works on paper. She assembles these works of art, and she gets a panel of art experts, museum curators, art historians, other artists, gallery owners, to evaluate these works of art. They don't know where these works of art came from. She brings them in, says, evaluate these works of art. Here's what Amabile and her colleagues said. Our results were quite startling. So a few of you are giggling. These are people probably who have taken graduate courses in psychology and actually read some of these social science journals, because if you read social science journals, you will realize this is about as exuberant as these guys get. Our results were quite startling. Here's what she found out. The commissioned works were rated as significantly less creative than the non-commissioned works, yet they were not rated as different in technical quality. In other words, the technical quality of the works was high and very similar, commissioned or non-commissioned. Someone who's making a living as a sculptor is a pretty darn good sculptor. But over and over again, it was the non-commissioned works that were deemed more creative. It was the non-commissioned works that were the ones that were the breakthroughs. And remember, she was surprised by this. Indeed, she was startled. And so she went back and she interviewed the artists, and here's what they talked about. They kept using the same word, constraints. Some constraints are fine. They help define a project, but beyond a certain point, it's no longer mine. So they would get commissions. A painter would get a commission, and they would say, hey, here's $1,000. I'll give you $1,000 to do a great oil painting. And they say, do something amazing. I really like this work. I really like that work. Here's $1,000. Do something really extraordinary. That's a pretty good commission. Artists tended to like that kind of commission. Okay? It wasn't that they didn't want the money. They wanted the money. But the commissions often weren't that way. The commissions were more like this. I love your oil paintings. You're a great painter. I want to give you $1,000 for a painting. Do something amazing. But just a few things. Just a few things. Number one, it needs to be about that big. Number two, I really like ducks. So if it can have like a duck in it, that'd be awesome. I've got I'm going to put it in my living room where I have a big green sofa. So it should sort of fit in with my green sofa. Oh, and you know what? I'm having people over. Can I get it by Tuesday? What they said was this. What they said, some constraints can help define the project, but with more constraints, it's no longer mine. So I'm going to try to do as much as I can a good job, but I simply can't do a great job. I'm too constrained to do a great job. And with the non-commissioned work, over and over again, with the lack of constraints, they were able to do the really breakthrough work. Now, why am I mentioning this? And this is going to lead us to, I think, a really interesting move for teachers, something that is absolutely doable within this system that doesn't require a lot of money. The reason I mention this is that if you look at workplaces, if you look at schools, there's no non-commissioned work. If you look at most companies, everything people do is commissioned work. There's no non-commissioned work. If you look at schools, everything's commissioned pretty much. There's no non-commissioned work. And this is going to give us a hint about how to do something really practical, something that's within our grasp that can really make a big difference. So that's the lay of the land. One, if-then rewards, great for simple and short term, not so great for complex and long term. It's not a close call, folks. Two, the problem with if-then rewards, especially with children, is not the reward, it's the if-then, because if-then is a form of control, and control can crush things that people are genuinely interested in. Three, please stop. Please stop. If-then rewards for teachers connected to standardized tests is a really bad idea. It doesn't work. We don't need to do any more studies on it. Stop it, all right? Just stop it. I actually think there's a simpler solution, that what we should do as sort of a political bargain that I think is doable, but I mean, it doesn't seem like any political bargain today is doable, which is let's raise the base pay of teachers. I don't think teachers get paid enough. Let's raise the base pay of teachers, but also make it easier to get rid of teachers who aren't up to snuff. And I think that's something that both sides will have a little bit to agree with, a little bit to disagree with, and it doesn't require these insanely inefficient, unworkable incentive systems. Raise the base pay, but just stop it, please. Just stop it. And then finally, we know from artists that what really motivates artists is a lack of constraints. So let's talk here. Let's be a little bit more remedial, and let's talk about some remedies of what works. Okay, so let's get over this. I mentioned this with teachers. You know, money is a motivator. You got to pay people fairly. You got to pay people fairly, and I'm convinced that teachers aren't paid fairly enough. The teachers should be paid more, given what they do, and given their status in society, and given their pay rates versus other kinds of professionals. But for those of you who are business people who are looking to motivate your staff, the research doesn't say that money doesn't matter. Money matters a lot. It matters a heck of a lot. You got to pay people fairly. But once you do that, it turns out there are 3 enduring motivators for the more complex creative work. I'm going to focus on one before we take some questions, but I'll go through them all. They are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I'm going to explain them backwards, and because I want to spend a lot of time talking about, not a lot of time, but some time talking about autonomy, because I think it offers some really practical things that we can do in classrooms that don't cost money, that you can do within this very, very rigid system. So purpose, very simple here. People need to know why they're doing something, not only how to do it. The research on this is overwhelming. There's a great study that showed that having university fundraisers read letters from people who benefited from the fundraising before they made their fundraising calls earn twice the amount of money as other people. Because they know, oh, I know why I'm doing this. I know why I'm raising money. Over and over again you see this. And I think a lot of times in teaching and coaching and management, we focus on the how. Here's how you do it. 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 And we don't focus enough on the why. Why are we doing it in the first place? Why does it matter? And I really think there's a huge performance boost one can get in emphasizing the how, bringing that, and I think there's a great kind of practice that teachers and managers alike can do, which is, next week, have 2 fewer conversations with your students or the people you're leading about how to do something and 2 more about why. Just at some point say, okay, why are we doing this? Why does this matter? And I think you'll see an uptick in performance. People are yearning for that sense of why. The research on this is fantastic. So, don't give short shrift to the why. Let's go to mastery here for a moment. And we can talk more about this in the questions. Mastery. Here's what the research shows very clearly, particularly in the workforce. The single biggest motivator day to day on the job is making progress and meaningful work. The days that people make progress are the days they're motivated. They're loyal to the organization. They feel like coming back for more. Making progress is inherently motivating. It is a source of, in some ways, renewable energy. The trouble is that people often don't know whether they're making progress or not because our feedback mechanisms are so creaky and old-fashioned. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to increase the metabolism and relevance and personalization of feedback inside of schools, inside of organizations, to put people in positions where they make progress, to help people see the progress they're making, to celebrate the progress they're making. I think one of the things that's going on now with the younger generation, and by younger generation I mean some teachers, say people under 30, is that they live in a world of rich, they've lived their entire lives in a world of rich, regular, robust feedback, using computers in elementary school and the internet in high school and text messages and video games their entire lives. And then they get inside established institutions, whether they're schools or companies. And in this alternative universe, you get feedback once a year. In an annual performance review. You get feedback once a year in an awkward kabuki theater style conversation with your boss. I mean, it's really insane. And if it's insane for 30-year-olds, it's doubly insane for 3-year-olds who are going to be even more immersed in this world of regular feedback. There's a great opportunity here, but this idea of making progress and progress depending on regular, meaningful feedback is really huge. I think great teachers have always done that. Great teachers haven't waited till the end of the term. Here's your feedback. Great coaches do that. It's a conversation. It's regular feedback. But there's some great academic evidence now about the importance of making progress as probably the most important thing on the job. And finally, let's talk about autonomy. I've spent a few minutes talking about this before, some questions, and give you a couple of interesting practices in schools. So in order to understand autonomy, we have to understand this word right here, management. Management. We take this word too seriously. We think that management somehow emanated from nature or was given to us by God. No, let's take it off its pedestal here for a second. Management is simply something that some guy invented. It's a technology. It's a technology for organizing people into productive capacities. It's a technology from the 1850s. Not many 1850s technologies we're using today, right? We've upgraded we've upgraded our technologies. Management is a technology. Here's the thing. Management is in some ways doesn't get enough credit for being as brilliant an invention as it was. I think management lifted living standards around the world in ways that are almost incalculable. I mean, it's incredible innovation. But management is a technology designed to get compliance, to get people to do what you want them to do the way you want them to do it. Right? If you think about even the phrase classroom management, all right, at some level it means getting them to be quiet, right? And just shut up and listen to me, right? It's compliance. And to be fair, we actually want compliance in classrooms and in organizations. Sometimes we just want compliance. There's no question about that. There's room for compliance. But ultimately, what do we want to prepare our kids for their future rather than our past? We want them to be engaged. We want them to be engaged. If you're leading a school, you want your teachers to be engaged. You don't want your teachers to be compliant, even though a lot of the rules and regulations are forcing them to be compliant more than engaged. You want people to be engaged, whether you're running a company, whether you're running a school, whether you're running in front of a classroom. You want people to be engaged. And here's the thing. Human beings don't engage by being managed. Human beings don't engage by being controlled. It's the wrong technology. Even if you sand off the rough edges, oil the gears a little bit, management is not a technology for engagement. It's a technology for compliance. And so stop using it where it doesn't work very well. Use it to get compliance where you need it. But if you want to have engagement, you need an alternative technology. And that alternative technology is self-direction. That's how human beings engage. That's how you engage, you as individuals. Every one of you in this room engages by getting there under your own steam. That's how human beings engage. That's how the people you love engage. They get there under their own steam. So the technology is self-direction. And I think that it's sometimes hard for adults to fathom this. And so a great exercise I found in helping adults realize this, particularly people who are skeptical that self-direction is a technology for engagement, is this. Ask somebody to describe the best boss they ever had. Ask somebody to describe the best boss they ever had. Very rarely will you hear people describe the best boss they ever had like this. Oh, the best boss I ever had, she was amazing. She breathed down my neck the whole time. She told me exactly what to do and precisely how to do it. She was unbelievably, almost pathologically controlling. And as a consequence, I was utterly compliant. It was the best working relationship of my life. What do you hear when you ask this question? We've asked this question to a lot of people lately. What do you hear? Inevitably, in the workplace, high standards and autonomy. High standards and autonomy. High standards and autonomy. If you ask people to describe their favorite teacher, especially adults, looking back, their favorite teacher, almost always, not almost always, you hear a tale of at least modest subversion, right? You hear a tale of someone who broke the rules a little bit. Someone who had high standards for you, but wasn't all about the compliance with the rules, who was basically skirting them every once in a while to keep the standards high and to keep the students engaged. That's how people engage. So if we really want engagement with our students, with our staff, with whoever, we got to look for ways to give people just a little bit more control over their time, when they do stuff, over their task, what they actually do, over their team, who they do it with, and over their technique. When people have a little bit more self-direction over these aspects of their work, whether it's school work or work, they do better. Let me give you, I put together a bunch of examples of this from business, and we're going to make an analogy to schools. Let me just rip through these things here. Okay, so Atlassian, Australian software company. They do something really cool. Once a quarter on Thursday afternoons, they say to their software developers, for the next 24 hours, go work on whatever you want as long as it's not part of your regular job. Do it the way you want, do whatever you want, do it with whomever you want. The only thing we ask is that you show what you've created to the rest of the company on Friday afternoon in this fun freewheeling meeting. They call these things FedEx days because you have to deliver something overnight. Now, I should point out that this summer they got a cease and desist letter from FedEx, so they now call them Ship It Days. But regardless of the name, it turns out that this one day of intense, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, ideas for new products, improvements to internal processes that had otherwise never emerged. There's a different starting point for motivation. It's not saying, inside of a company, if you do something awesome, I'll give you a carrot. It's saying, hey, we hire good people. Good people want to do good things. One way to help good people do good things is to get out of their way for a day. Give you another example of this, another software example. Again, don't let the software examples fake you out, because it has less to do with the product that's being created than with the fact that many of these companies are more homegrown. They're not legacy companies. Intuit makes Quicken, TurboTax, those kinds of personal software, and they faced a challenge recently. They had to go from selling software on little disks and shrink-wrapped boxes to selling software that's downloadable and executable on machines, to suddenly making software. That transition itself is monumental. Then, now that they can make their software available on people's computers, their customers say, wow, wait a second, it'd be awesome to have TurboTax on my iPad. I would love to have QuickBooks on my Android phone. Suddenly they have to make them available, the software available to all these mobile devices. This is a huge undertaking. Fortunately, at Intuit, they've had a practice for almost since their inception for their engineers of something called 10% time, where people can spend 10% of their time working on whatever they want. Now, the companies that do this don't sign away the intellectual property rights to what's created during that 10% time, but what they do is they say 10% of your time you can work on whatever you want. You have full autonomy over what you do, how you do it, who you do it with. Just 10% of your time. Here's what the head of innovation at Intuit told me. After our CEO declared mobile was key to our strategy, none of our business units were able to change direction on a dime, but our employees using 10% time created 7 mobile apps before any other formally funded mobile projects even got started. See, we have this notion that accountability and autonomy are at odds with each other, but increasingly, autonomy is the pathway to accountability. Autonomy is how people do great things. Let me give you another really interesting idea here. Let's go to this company right here, Columbia Credit Union. It's not even a company, it's a credit union in Vancouver, Washington. They do something really amazing that has caught the attention of educators around the world. Literally, that's not hyperbole. Here's what they do. There's a young woman there who runs the customer service department, 6 people who answer the phones from credit union members. She says to her boss, "Boss, I want to do a FedEx day." Her boss says, "No." So she comes up with something else. She says this. She tells her staff, again, it's 6 people answering phones at a credit union in Washington State. She says to her team, "Team, here's what I want you to do. 1 hour every week, I'd like you to leave the phones. Go somewhere else. Think about a better way to run this place. Think about something we're doing for our members that we should stop doing. Think about something we aren't doing that we should consider doing. 1 hour a week. You leave, think about a better way to run this place, and I'll cover your phones during that hour." She calls it a genius hour. All of a sudden, this little 6-person customer service department at this credit union is coming up with all these great ideas. Let me give you one more example of this, okay, a more academic example and very appropriate to this week. This is the week that the folks in Sweden announced the Nobel Prizes. Okay, so make sure your phone is on all week. Let me tell you about these 2 guys right here. These are Andrei Geim and Konstantin Vasilov. They won, not this year, the year before, they won the Nobel Prize in Physics. They isolated something called graphene. Graphene is a substance that is 1 atom thick, and 70 times the strength of steel. It's almost it's like, whoa, wait a second, that seems like unreal, like something in a fantasy novel. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs in material science in a generation. It has huge implications for how to build stuff, how to make things more secure, has a big impact on solar technology as well. Huge breakthrough. So, how do they do their work? Here's what they do. They have papers to write, so that they owe at journals. They write grants, as some of you do, to get funding for research. But at this laboratory at the University of Manchester, thanks to this guy Geim, the older guy, they've always taken a few hours every week for what they call Friday evening experiments. A few hours every week for what they call Friday evening experiments. The rules on Friday evening experiments are very simple. 1, can't be anything where you have a paper due. 2, can't be anything that you have gotten funding for. 3, can't be anything boring. A few hours every week just to work on stuff that they find interesting, that they're curious about. And they usually do them on Friday nights because they're physicists. It turns out that they made their breakthrough on graphene, not in their regular work, but in their Friday evening experiments. Think about that for a second. Now let's walk back here for a second. What do these things have in common? Atlassian's FedEx days, the Genius Hour, 10% time, Friday evening experiments. What do they have in common? Unconstrained, good. What else? Creative, good. Autonomous, good. Trust, good. Open-ended. That's non-commissioned work. This is non-commissioned work. All right, Atlassian, 361 days of commissioned work, 4 days of non-commissioned work. Intuit, 90% commissioned work, 10% non-commissioned work. Genius Hours, 39 hours a week of commissioned work, 1 hour of non-commissioned work. This laboratory, 60 hours a week of commissioned work, 3 hours a week of non-commissioned work. See a pattern there? Look at these guys here. This is a big deal, folks. These guys won. Look at these guys. I mean, you don't need to look at them, but just think about these guys. Think about these guys. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics for non-commissioned work. Nobel Prize in Physics. That's pretty good, right? If one of my kids called me in 20 years and said, "Hey, Dad, I just won the Nobel Prize in Physics," I would say, not bad, right? Nobel Prize in Physics is pretty good. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics for non-commissioned work, all right? This is something that is gurgling inside of organizations. On the fringe right now, it's going to be the mainstream soon, and it offers within the education system, which is very constrained, I recognize, where there are all kinds of rules and all kinds of regulations. I think that legislators have done basically everything they possibly could to thwart the autonomy of teachers over the last 15 or 20 years. And so I recognize how difficult it is out there, but this offers a glimmer of something you can do. And what's so awesome about it is that it's happening already. Okay, so here's what you could do. So again, you know what, there's a tendency. I've changed my view on how to make change. I used to say, like a la Jim Collins, whom I love, big, hairy, audacious goals. Big, hairy, audacious goals. And I think there's room for that. But the more I see organizations, the more I see stuff, the more I see how stuff actually works, I become a bigger proponent of small wins. So if you, and when I look at my own life and I look at the own things that I want to change, there's a tendency to say, can I change everything? I look at it as a writer. Publishing industry is totally messed up. I mean, it's so messed up on so many different levels. All right, and I look at that as someone who works in that industry, and I say, if I say, can I change everything? I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. If you look at an education system, an individual teacher, a university president, a school principal, a state superintendent of schools, can I change everything? The answer is, for those folks, I don't think you really can. But I think it's the wrong question. I think the real question is, can I do one small thing in my own world to make it better? And the answer to that is almost always yes. And then when you look at some of these big systemic changes, that's how they started. Someone did one small thing in his or her own realm, and it cascaded out there. And so, again, this is how I think about my own stuff. What's one small thing I can do? And I think that this idea of non-commissioned work is one small thing that one can do in a classroom. Examples. Okay, let's have, if there are any principals here, let's have FedEx days for teachers. Like, instead of the next all for professional development, but maybe for one professional development this year, instead of having the more kind of formal professional development, do this. Have a FedEx day for teachers and ask teachers, what's one way we can make this a better school? And have teachers work on that, and at the end of the day, present to their colleagues their one idea for making the school better. You think you'd come up with any good ideas? Oh yeah, I think you would. How about this? Why not FedEx days for students? Maybe ask students that same question. What's one thing that we can do to make this school better? Have the students take a Friday and have a FedEx day and try to come up with one way to make the school better or make that classroom better. I think you'd get a lot of really bad ideas from students. But I also think you'd get a few real gems that could actually change the place. All right? So that's just a form of non-commissioned work. If you look here, Genius Hours. I am amazed. Genius Hour, okay? It's a small bite-sized thing. There are so many teachers across America, across the world, doing a Genius Hour. Anybody here doing a Genius Hour? Yeah, a couple people doing Genius Hours in this room. This is taking hold, folks. These are people who are making changes in their own realm. So much so that this started, honestly, this Genius Hour thing, I did a blog post on it, okay? And, and somebody in the tens of people who read my blog picked up on it, and suddenly it cascaded. So you want to find out more, go to geniushour.com. I didn't start this. A teacher started this. Follow it on Twitter, Genius Hour. There's a whole wiki there of geniushour.wikispaces.com. Go to Pinterest and search for Genius Hour. This is an idea that's taking hold. It's not taking hold because somebody at the top said, thou shalt do a Genius Hour. It's taking hold because a bunch of teachers, a lot of teachers, literally hundreds of teachers said, you know what? This is one small thing I can do in my world to make things a little bit better. And the more who do this, the more it cascades to other people. The more they set up websites saying, here's how you can do it. The more they set up wikis saying, contribute your thing. The more they say, here's some things that I pinned for my Genius Hour. Take a look at my Pinterest page. Follow Genius Hour on Twitter. This is an idea that is really, really taking hold out there. All right, and it's taking hold without legislators knowing about it, thankfully, without legislators mandating it or prohibiting it or whatever. It's basically people saying, what's one small thing I can do? Let me give you another example of this. This is the last one. Then we'll take some questions. This guy is Josh Stumpfenhorst. He's a terrific guy. He's a middle school teacher in Naperville, Illinois. All right, middle school teacher in Naperville, Illinois. He hears about FedEx days. He says to his principal, I want to do a FedEx day. His principal says, I don't know, Josh. I don't know. And I also don't like the name. He says, what if I call it an innovation day? Principal, I'm all in for an innovation day. All right? So he started doing innovation. This is a guy, he doesn't, I don't know if he always dresses like this. This guy is, you know, he's a Midwesterner, Naperville, Illinois. He's a basketball coach. He's a track coach. This guy is just not a radical, all right? And so he says, I'm going to do an innovation day with my students. One day, I think every 2 months, I think he does it. Go work on whatever you want, but you got to show what you created to the rest of the class so they learn something from it. All right? And he started writing about this and actually becoming a mentor to other teachers who are doing this. And I want to show you, I want to end on something that he wrote about this innovation day that he did at Naperville Middle School in Naperville, Illinois. He says, as the students, he does it on Fridays, he says, as the students were walking out at the end of the day, one student stopped me and asked, can we do this again tomorrow? So this is Josh still talking. The student looked me dead in, he said, as the students were coming back tomorrow, he said, blah, 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 blah. One student stopped me and said, can we do this again tomorrow? And then so Josh says to him, you know what? That's nice, but you know, you realize tomorrow is Saturday. And the kid says to him, looked me dead in the eyes and replied, I would come back tomorrow to do this again. How many kids want to come on Saturdays to do stuff? And so this is my last thing for you, is like these kids, I think, want to learn, they want to do good stuff, they want to make a difference, they want to have breakthroughs, and to some extent what we have to do is remove the constraints, get out of their way, and they'll want to come back tomorrow. So let me end there and let's take some questions. Thank you.